any good talent, the moment that they have a conversation with you, the next thing they're doing is going online and having the conversation with 3 other startups that look just like you that just reached out to them yesterday. It's not just a functional skill set that we look for, it's definitely a personality too, right? There's an EQ, a collective EQ around the company that's really important and embedded in the culture. In my interview experience, I was almost taken aback by how down to earth, how measured, how humble especially the leadership, so my boss, the CEO.
We are here with Andrew Blevins, Head of Talent Acquisition at Middesk, a business verification and risk assessment company that has a suite of tools designed for B2B companies to background check their customers. Andrew has a wonderful variety of experiences under his belt that I believe prime his discernment in the talent acquisition space. Andrew, thanks so much for being on with us today.
Yeah, Lisa, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So could you just start by telling us a little bit more about Middesk, your role, and any previous experiences that led you there?
Yeah, of course. So starting with Middesk, really cool tool that is really aimed at helping, especially financial institutions, understand the other businesses that they engage with to do any sort of transaction, right? So a really easy use case is some bank and some other small business that's seeking a loan from that bank. It's actually the bank's requirement that they keep up-to-date records on who they're doing business with to show the government. And the kind of old school way of doing this involves data sweeps that take weeks or months. Enter Middesk. We've actually bought access to all this data, built fresh APIs on top of it so that we can pull the data and report it to the necessary individual within seconds or minutes instead of weeks or months. So high level, we're helping these businesses make decisions much more quickly and effectively with more accurate information when it comes to the identity of other businesses.
Super cool tool, and a little bit about your role over there and any kind of previous experiences that led you there.
Yeah, of course. So I've been in the recruiting space for going on 10 years. I can't believe it. It's been a whirlwind. This will be my third kind of scale up. The previous 2, I joined slightly later on in the cycle, both companies at about 300, companies called Medallia and then Blend, and both had successful exits. And so I have a couple nice kind of checks in the in the wins column. And similar mission at both, right? I've focused across kind of different recruiting arenas in both, but joined at about the 300 mark and saw both companies grow to thousands of people and like I said, IPO. And so I think that had situated me nicely to take a step forward or earlier on in the cycle of kind of one of these scale ups. And actually Middesk found me a couple months ago, reached out, and the mission resonated. And then in speaking with the leadership, I was just blown away with the quality of individual. And so all of the things kind of resonated with me, and that's what led me here.
Well, congrats on your new role there.
Thank you.
So, what candidates are looking for today in company culture in the past few years has been significantly different than even previous years. Talk to us a little bit about the culture at Middesk and how you believe it resonates with or attracts competitive talent.
Yeah, there's kind of a framing or I guess a short saying that we have here, and it's high standards, high support. And I kind of love that because I've definitely noticed that the bar here is very high. It's a really high bar to be hired here, right? There's a lot of vetting that happens, and it's not just a functional skill set that we look for. It's definitely a personality too, right? There's an EQ, a collective EQ around the company that's really important and embedded in the culture. And with that, I think this kind of idea of high standards, right? We assume that people can do a lot, right? And we hold people to that level of being able to deliver really high quality work. But you also have all the people around you supporting you to do that, right? Which I think it's a really nice match. It'd be kind of unfair to have one without the other. And so I like kind of that way of thinking about things. A really good example is actually, I think it was in the last year, so before my time at the company, but this is a story that I've heard. We had to go through a big data testing phase for one of our big customers. And what the company actually did was they got everyone involved in this data test, whereas usually, maybe two or three more operation data ops folks would focus on it. They got everybody in the company doing these kind of manual data entry exercises, even the CEO, CTO. And it's just such a good example of how the company rallies around any given cause, one, for the best possible outcome, but two, so that nobody feels stranded. And I think that story really illustrates a piece of the culture here at Middesk that I really like.
Now, we're facing a market today where candidates are actively interviewing with like 5 companies at one time, and you think you have them in the bag, and then they end up signing up with someone else. So now more than ever, we know that the candidate experience is super important. From your perspective, what does it look like to create a super positive candidate experience in 2022?
Yeah, and this is going to sound cliche, so hopefully I'll break it down so that there's something insightful here, I hope. But for me, it really does come down to personalization.
Mm-hmm.
And that I mean that from every stage of the process, right? Like, you think about it from the initial engagement, whatever that initial interaction is, all the way through to every single touch point that you have, like selling, closing, the entire gamut. And I kind of ask myself 4 different questions. It's who, what, how, and why. And the who is, what resource am I going to engage? Who within the company will most resonate with this person based on what I've gleaned about, kind of both sides. The what is what emotion I want to evoke, right? Like, what do I want them to feel based on this interaction that they're about to have? The how is kind of the format, the structure of the interaction, right? Like, how does this person communicate? How do they like to be communicated with, right? And then the when, I think timing is really important, right? I think there's an arc that we want to create, like an engagement arc that you kind of want to steadily rise over time, and you don't want to peak or plateau too early because you lose momentum. And so I'm kind of thinking about all of those things as I try to personalize an experience and create meaningful touch points for somebody. And so far, that seemed to work okay for me. I think I have more wins than losses under my belt. Something's going right.
Andrew, I love that you gave that framework. And I think that definitely speaks to almost the power dynamic shift going on right now, where it is a candidates market and hiring managers, talent acquisition needs to be focused on the candidates specifically. So, beyond company culture and hiring experience is also the discussion of what candidates expect in terms of perks and benefits today. So, what types of perks and benefits does Middesk offer?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of talk about this from my lens as a candidate. One of the big reasons that I joined, and I've heard this feedback throughout other new hires, is the level of accessibility around the company. In my interview experience, I was almost taken aback by how down to earth, how measured, how humble the especially the leadership. So my boss, the CEO, is a good example. It was just so easy to talk to them, and it was so clear that they wanted to learn from me, right? And in that moment, that almost like destroys this idea of a hierarchy when you feel like you're being heard and that you have some value to add in moment one. And I've noticed that same demeanor, that same approach in conversations around the company from any level to any level. And I'm like, that's what I love about being at a startup. But I think Middesk takes it to another level, and it's just part of the humaneness of our team and our leadership. They're just good people, really high EQ, really approachable. And it makes for having maybe what could be difficult or challenging conversations much easier and more pleasant, for sure.
And now you guys made it to the SMB Tech 50, which, for those of you who don't know, is the first list to recognize the growth and potential of startups that serve small and medium sized businesses. Andrew, from your experience with high growth startups, what is your advice for how young high growth companies should go about building their employer brand? And what are both some challenges and maybe some benefits of entering into the market during today's hiring?
Yeah. It's a good question, right? And I always go back to thinking about social media and how it's such a double-edged sword, right? It's a blessing and a curse. And every interaction that you have with a candidate could end up somewhere on the internet. And like Glassdoor is a great example of a source that I think people are more and more heavily relying on for that type of information. And so I go back to kind of thinking about, what emotion am I evoking? And I think leaning on the side of transparency is a way of kind of de-risking negative publicity. I just read so many reviews on Glassdoor where I'm like, this could have been prevented if had just been transparency. If both sides had known how the other side was feeling, like this situation wouldn't have gotten to where it did. And so that's kind of been my philosophy in the hiring world is, if there's a difficult message to share, I'd rather be the person that shares it. And I know the risk, the other side of it is risking kind of a negative feeling to an interaction, but that could be the thing that person needed to hear. And that could really mean something down the line. I'd rather take that risk than just avoid having a difficult conversation.
Andrew, I love that piece of advice. I think that speaks to the high emotional intelligence you have there and the rest of the crew at Middesk.
Thank
So,
you.
what are the 3 recruitment lessons or philosophies you have learned over the past few years that have really impacted the way that you view talent acquisition?
Yeah, I think this is kind of one broad concept that probably has a lot of little things you could pull from it. But for me, it's really playing the long game,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I just think the day and age of having a quick process with a candidate where there's no competition and it's just kind of like assumed that this is going to go a positive direction for the company, is those days are over, right? I think that any good talent, the moment that they have a conversation with you, the next thing they're doing is going online and having the conversation with 3 other startups that look just like you that just reached out to them yesterday. I did. I did the same thing, literally the exact same thing. And so I don't think that we can take anything for granted these days. And to me, so what do I do with that, right? To me, it's really building lasting connections, thinking about the long term, right? Like always having the exploratory conversation, always taking the opportunity to mentor or coach or guide or be mentored, coached, or guided, and understanding that just because it's not a win in the short term doesn't mean it's not a win in the long term, right? And so it really is having that kind of big picture vision. I know that's only like one topic, but that's just what I keep going back to.
It's great. It is really good answer. And so at Solvable, we're all about what drives purpose and meaning for people at work. So I would love to know what drives purpose and meaning for you at your workplace.
Yeah. There's a lot of different things, right? For me, I'm highly stimulated by solving interesting problems, right? I'm that kind of person that if I'm like not working on something, I get bored, right? And then I get antsy. And so for me, that like the way that I've been able to do that is just through human connection. As a hiring leader and a hiring manager now, like one of the most gratifying things that I can do is build connections with new people, right? Again, whether it's candidates or just an informal conversation with somebody, like those are the moments that I walk away from feeling exhilarated, kind of. And then the flip side of that is trying to be like that insightful partner to my leaders as well. It's kind of the mirror side of it, is trying to offer a perspective or a framework or something that somebody maybe hadn't already thought of. That's what fills my cup. And just having like interesting discussions and learning something new, right? Like I think as we have these conversations, we always learn from them. So those are kind of the things that I think I enjoy the most.
Andrew, thank you so much for being on with us today. And thank you all for listening to Architects of Contemporary Hiring.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.